the Emergency Management Minister and Agriculture Minister, Murray Watt, joins me. Let me ask you first, thanks for your time.
Hey, Andrew.
Let me ask you first about the earthquake in the Solomons. Do we know if there's a tsunami looming or anything more on this matter?
I haven't been advised of that myself, Andrew. In fact, I just left the Senate after question time where Penny Wong provided a statement on this and obviously extended our sympathies and offer of assistance to the Solomon Islands. We've obviously had an earthquake in Indonesia in the last 24 hours as well. So I certainly haven't received any advice to that effect, but I'll be getting some further briefing on that this afternoon. And
it is a busy afternoon for you because you're talking to insurers, I understand. How widespread is this practice of refusing people their insurance payouts, and is there anything as government you can do about it?
My impression, Andrew, is that different companies do things different ways, and I've seen the statements from the Insurance Council today who acknowledge that it wasn't particularly sensitive for these kind of statements to be sent out to people at this time. I do think it seems to have been a bit of an accident in that these were the sort of these were notices that people were going to be receiving anyway, which happened to hit in the middle of a flood. So I think the insurers have got to take a look at their systems to manage those kind of notifications in future. But what I can certainly tell you is that the problem of people not being able to afford insurance or get it at all is a huge and growing problem. I guess I first encountered it as a Queensland senator in North Queensland, where it was a real issue around cyclones and floods. But what I'm finding is that every community I now go to after flood events, it's the same issue. Pretty much every community I've been into over the last few months, I meet people who can't get insurance or can't afford it. And this has become a big problem over the last few years.
Well, is this, I mean, I remember covering floods in Wollongong in 1998, and this was an issue. Do the insurance companies need to do better?
I think they can do better, there's no doubt about that. And I actually gave a speech at the Insurance Council's annual conference a couple of weeks ago, which might have ruffled a few feathers, because the point I was making was that our government is now doing some of the things that insurers said were necessary to bring down insurance premiums. So what we now need to do is to see insurers deliver their end of the bargain. So insurers told us before the election that we needed a much bigger investment in mitigation. We've committed to do that with legislation passing the Parliament this week, hopefully. They said that we needed to do work around building on floodplains. There's obviously work underway at National Cabinet on that. And a number of other things that the insurers said were needed to reduce premiums are now happening. So my call of the insurers is, well, if we're doing our end of the bargain, you've got to do yours as well.
These small business grants that were announced in Ugara today, are they subject to tax?
They probably would be, because that has definitely been the situation over the years. My understanding is there's only been one or two occasions over the last few years where these types of grants are not subject to tax.
Scott Morrison made them exempt, didn't he?
I think he did that on one occasion, but the general practice...
Why don't you do that?
Well, for a couple of things. The general practice of the former government was to make these grants taxable, and remember that the costs that people incur in clean-up would be tax deductible, so you effectively end up in a situation where it's tax neutral for people. They would be taxed on these payments as income, but equally for all of their repair costs they'd be able to claim tax deductions, so they won't be left worse off.
Look, this kind of sounds like Treasury leading you down the garden path, I have to say, Mr Watt. I mean, most Australians would be listening to this and thinking, if you're going to give grants, don't tax them. Will you have a rethink about this?
Well, I think it's only fair when you're trying to be responsible with taxpayers' money, that if people are going to be able to get a tax deduction for their repair costs, and that's only fair, then I think it's reasonable for them to pay tax on those grants as well.
But that comes a lot later, right? The people need the money now.
Well, people won't be paying their tax until the end of the year, so they will be able to get those payments straight away. And in fact, since we've been in office, we've made it smoother and quicker for people to get those payments. So for instance, these grants that have been approved today, a small business will be able to get their first $25,000 without producing receipts, because we know people have got to get that money quickly. If they want to go to the next level and get the full $50,000, they've got to be able to produce receipts, because again, we've got to be careful not to get defrauded as well.
What's the rush with this IR legislation?
The rush, Andrew, is that workers have been waiting for 10 years to get decent pay rises. We all know that the former government had that policy of deliberately keeping wages low, and that's made it harder for people to get by. But also, let's not forget the benefits to business in this as well. You know, we've seen low productivity under the former government's IR system, and we want to turn that around as well.
Aren't wages going up anyway? I mean, you've recommended lifting the minimum wage. That occurred. That sort of flows through.
Yep.
There's not a lot of labour around. Aren't they going up naturally?
They're not. They are certainly on the improve, and that's a good thing. And I think that the position that we took around the minimum wage, putting in a submission supporting the increase to the minimum wage was helpful. Obviously, we've now seen a wage rise for aged care workers, which may flow through to other sectors. But, you know, if you get out there, as I'm sure you do, and speak to your average worker, they're struggling with cost of living and their wages haven't kept up, and we need to see more.
All right, we heard Senate testimony today that to enter one of these multi-bargaining agreements, it will cost a small business $14,000. Is that a bit unreasonable?
Well, I've only sort of just learned this myself recently, so I'd want to get a few more, a bit more information about that. But
it's in government documents.
Yeah, but I mean, let's remember that, the current IR system for small businesses is already pretty costly and complex. If you ask your average small business person, it's very time consuming, very costly if they've got to engage lawyers and things like that. And remember that the whole point of these reforms that we're trying to bring in is about getting more agreements and less conflict. If we can get those agreements up front, that means that employers don't have to spend money on lawyers interpreting awards and things like that going forward.
As Agriculture Minister, how hopeful are you that we can get some of these trade sanctions lifted by China?
Oh, look, it would certainly be a terrific thing. In fact, the day after Prime Minister Albanese had his meeting with President Xi last week, I addressed a conference of a couple of hundred wine industry growers and grape growers in South Australia, and their industry, along with so many others, has suffered terribly from our relationship breaking down with China. So, I think at the same time we've got to be realistic. It's not going to happen overnight, but even just having some dialogue is a big improvement.
Because the Global Times has an editorial that Chinese state mouthpiece saying they won't be able to resume properly relations until Australia dumps AUKUS. What's your reaction to that?
Well, I mean, the Prime Minister's made very clear that we're not going to be sacrificing our values or our national interests. So, it's obviously a matter for China in the end about whether they're prepared to relax some of those trade bans that they've had in place. We certainly want them to, and we think it's in China's interest for them to do that as well. So, but we're not going to be backing down on our principles and our values, and we hope that they will, at some point in the future, and hopefully soon, make some changes.
And you've made a deal with the Greens and David Pocock on electric cars in order to get the extra 2 sitting days up?
Well, I'm not sure if it's a deal, and I actually just, again, heard about this just before I left the chamber, and one of our people was trying to work out whether these reports were even accurate. But
I think it is.
Yeah, well, I haven't been involved in those negotiations.
All right. Well,
but we certainly are prepared to offer more sitting days. Obviously, Senator Pocock has been asking for a bit more time to consider this.
It sounds like you've had to give something to get that policy-wise.
Well, again, I haven't been involved in those negotiations.
Well, just finally, has there been a cabinet discussion on what to do in terms of gas and electricity prices? Is that decision imminent?
Well, you would expect that I would not reveal cabinet discussions, but it's already on the public record that these matters have been discussed at cabinet level. I'm not going to go into any detail about that, but it's something that is weighing on the minds of a number of cabinet ministers. We know it's impacting on manufacturers, we know it's impacting on consumers, and if we don't take action, it's going to get worse. So there's a lot of work underway on that right now.
Emergency Management Minister Murray Watt, thanks so much for your time.
Thanks, Andrew.